Becky and today I'm going to be reviewing The Furies by Katie Lowe. The Furies is a YA standalone thriller and I would describe it as a 90s witch club going rogue after school, but the official blurb is, in 1998, a 16-year-old girl is found dead. She's posed on a swing on her boarding school's property, dressed in all white with no known cause of death. Whispers and rumours swirl with no answers. But there are a few who know what happened and one girl that will never forget. 1 year earlier, new girl Violet steps onto the campus of Elm Hollow Academy, an all-girls boarding school on the outskirts of a sleepy coastal town. This is her fresh start, her chance to begin again in the wake of tragedy and leave her demons behind. Bright but a little strange, uncertain and desperate to fit in, she soon finds herself invited to an advanced study group led by her alluring and mysterious art teacher Annabelle. There, with 3 other girls, Alex, Grace and Robin, the 5 of them delve into the school's long buried grim history of the school founders' academic interest in the occult, of gruesome 17th century witch trials. Annabelle does her best to convince the girls that their studies aren't related to ancient rituals and that they are just history and mythology. But the more she tries to warn the girls off the topic, the more they are drawn to it and the possibility that they could harness magic for themselves. Violet quickly finds herself in a heady world of lawless power, except she is needled by the disappearance of a former member of the group, one of whom Violet shows an uncanny resemblance. As her friend's actions take a turn darker and spiral out of control, Violet begins to wonder who she can trust, all the while becoming even more deeply entangled. How far will these young girls go to protect one another or destroy each other? So this blurb and what I expect from the book are completely different things. I definitely picked up this book because I expected the Furies from Greek mythology, which aren't a huge portion of this book. My first impressions once starting to read this book was that it was a very 90s inspired piece. Plus, with the kind of secret clique and the witch element, I felt that this was very apt for the 1998 setting. A thing you should really take note of is that it clearly takes inspiration from The Craft, the film. I would also like to point out that this book isn't particularly fantasy focused. It is a YA thriller. Whilst there's talk of magic and witches and mythology and all these kind of aspects that you would find in a fantasy book, I wouldn't class this as a fantasy book. These witches aren't Sabrina the Teenage Witch, they're like witches in the real world. And I feel like the entire story is more about kind of female empowerment and the girls learning about things that will help them in the future. It is a very clear sisterhood of the 4 formula, but I did find that only 2 of these girls were really fleshed out in any real way. None of our characters really felt likable as well, which I think, or at least I hope, was the purpose of the book and what Katie was aiming for. But because they were so dislikable, but we were having like a sisterhood theme, this changed the formula slightly and it made it a lot more intriguing to read. It also changed up the interactions they had with one another. There was different pairings who acted in different ways to each other, which I really enjoyed. However, they all do have a very unhealthy dependence on one another. Each of them have flaws which can create a lot of tension in the relationships between them, but because they're teenagers, they're not really noticing these flaws and this toxic behaviour and cutting it off there. They just continue on with the friendship despite having kind of this negative impact. Violet is the main character and she is our kind of point of view to the book. She's currently trying to get over her past as unfortunately her dad and sister died in an accident and her mother has basically checked out at this point in grief. Pairing this trauma with kind of natural high school insecurities and low self-esteem led Violet straight onto the path into this book and makes her kind of the perfect addition to a secret society which she can't tell anyone about. Violet is the kind of girl that doesn't make her own decisions. She's very much a sheep in this group and this can be very infuriating in some aspects of the book, mainly because you just question why she's being so dumb, but then you kind of do realize that she is a teenager and it's kind of real to life to what a true teenager would act like. Robin is the leader of the group, you could say, and she's very much the kind of negative, toxic friends that you see in schools all around the country. However, because she's a popular person in this group, she has a confidence and an aura which draws people to her, similar to Violet, who is instantly drawn into her kind of charming ways. I found Robin to be such an interesting character because we're looking at her from Violet's point of view, which both shows off her toxic traits, but because Violet can't let go of Robin as her friend, we see her from a very biased perspective. And at the same time, everything she says, you're not quite sure whether you can trust her. We don't know if what she's saying is the truth or a lie or an exaggeration. And so reading through the book, you're not quite sure what's going to happen at every turn. And of course, because Violet's kind of stuck under Robin's spell throughout most of the book, most of the times where you're thinking, oh, is Robin lying? Violet isn't having those thoughts. Violet is trusting her completely for quite a lot of the read. For both the reader and for Violet, Robin is kind of a symbolic figure of the darkness that can lie within teenage girls because of self-esteem, confidence, and also just the way the world treats them. This book leans very heavily on being female and empowering females because of the way we're being treated throughout the years. So Robin and Violet were the two fleshed out characters of the group of four. I found that Grace and Alex, however, were very much sideline characters and didn't have much depth. Whilst they were a group of four, they often paired off as Robin, Violet, Alex, Grace. And so Alex and Grace were kind of in and out of the book a lot more because Violet didn't have as many interactions with them. Alex and Grace did have a lot of scenes with Robin, which we didn't see, but Violet was told about later on, which I found interesting because I wanted to see how maybe they acted differently or the same, whether Violet was there or not, because they often did act differently when Robin was there or not. In keeping with the kind of overall story arc, both of these girls have a kind of revenge plotline near the end, and this ties up into a little bow at the end of the book. However, we didn't really get to see much about these. We know exactly what happened and we know the outcomes, but we don't really see much of the process of the two girls dealing with these situations. I don't want to spoil anything, so I'm sorry I'm being so vague. I'm not sure if actually rereading the book would maybe help me pick up on more signs of these problems earlier on, but I do feel like these two characters were lacking something. Despite this, I found all the relationships between the four girls to be really true to life. I myself went to an all-girls school. I've seen what being surrounded by girls all the time acts like, and whilst our school probably didn't have secret societies and witch clubs, I could definitely categorize people I knew into these categories of the four girls. Overall, I found the writing style of the book was really nice to read. I found that I was drawn straight into the book as soon as I started reading, and even though it was a very kind of slow burn thriller, I always wanted to know what was going to happen next. But because this book is very dark, some of the writing does horrify you. It can be a little dark at times. And this also has kind of the effect of making you want to throw the book across the room to stop reading it. But of course, the actual writing means that you don't want to stop reading it because you do want to find out everything about these characters. If you do like dark topics, I do think this is probably a good book for you. If you don't like dark topics and you have some triggers, this may not be the best book. Off the top of my head, the trigger warnings do include murder, rape, animal abuse, and drug abuse. As I said, the book itself is very slow burn thriller, and in the middle it slows down quite a lot. We go from kind of introduction to all the characters to very elongated section where we have to watch as all these characters become friends and see different interactions, and also set up the kind of revenge plotline I mentioned as well. But the middle section has a lot of kind of high school mean girl drama, which can get a little bit old because it's quite juvenile as it is high school. But it does create tension on the relationships in the book, which leads us to a great ending. And of course, it keeps to that true to life feel between the kind of how the girls are acting, how they interact with each other, and it all links together to actually read like this is a teenage group. So yeah, it's a very psychological thriller as well. Some people have tagged it as a murder mystery, and whilst there is a murder that happened that is mentioned in the book and is the girl that disappeared a year before Violet, it's not really a murder mystery because I feel like no one's really looking for the clues. And whilst it does clearly start as a catalyst for the book, this is why they need a new secret member, it doesn't seem like a goal for any of the characters to figure out what actually happened. And when we do figure out what happened, it doesn't lead straight into the end of the book. So I do think it's a thriller based on Violet, whilst Girl That Disappeared isn't a huge factor into the overarching storyline. It's just one small thing. One of the negative things for me was that the world building wasn't the best. We're told we're in a kind of sleepy rural coastal town, which I've been in many of a rural coastal town, but I couldn't really see this apart from I think a couple of times where they're kind of on the beach. This town also has an elite all-girls boarding school and also a college close by. This doesn't, for me at least, doesn't really resonate as something I can really see if it's a small coastal town. And really everywhere we kind of went wasn't really described. Because this is set in the real world, I think there's kind of an assumption of what things look like. The only thing I could really picture in my mind was the clock tower where they have their meetings. But the boarding school I kind of placed in my own school set out when thinking about it, and then just added the clock tower in. And for the coastal town, I couldn't picture where we were and what was going on and what kind of place this actually looks like. And even with the clock tower, thinking back, when I'm picturing it, I'm thinking of kind of a spooky, witchy clock tower, which I think my brain might have just filled in the gaps after we heard witches and clock tower. Despite some of the flaws, I did really enjoy reading the Furies, and the ending left me wanting more. So I actually googled like what is there going to be a second book? But there isn't, I don't think. The book as a whole was really enjoyable to read. It kind of dragged you along through it because of the writing style, and the ending definitely left me wanting more. There's questions that are still open to interpretation by the reader, and so I'm kind of excited to see what Katie Lowe will come out with next. Thanks guys for watching, and I hope to see you again soon.